I guess probably the best example, to go back to the phenomenology thing, of what being in time is most known for, I guess, is in Division 1, he analyzes what he calls the everydayness of Dasein. So basically just kind of how we go about our day-to-day lives. And the main takeaway there is that the way our most basic mode of experience is not like I'm a subject over and against a world of objects, but rather this sort of engaged involvement in the world. Like when I'm engaged in the activity of painting, for example, I don't experience myself and the canvas and the paintbrush as separate entities as I would if I were just to like observe them or just like look at them, you know? I do become aware of them as distinct objects when, for example, I discover my paint palette is dried up or my paintbrush is not well equipped for the task at hand. So when there's a sort of breakdown in the everyday, that's when we are able to become aware of the fact that this is like, you know, like it's not until the things break down that we are able to get a glimpse into this most basic structure of our experiences. Right. Where we're kind of like snapped out of it, and then it's like, you know, at least that's part of his methodology, which is like a breakdown in the everyday, or like a breakdown in spatial experiences. So when we are trying to like use something and we discover it's actually like, oh, let's say I wanted to wear a particular sweater, and then I discover that I actually left it at home in Texas. Then it's like, then the idea of this like geographical distance becomes salient to me. Yeah. But otherwise, if the sweater was here and it was just like, it was in the basement versus, I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's almost like in the system not flowing. Like when a road bump is hit is when you're aware of how the car was moving, right? And in it just going, it doesn't really call your attention to it. This is kind of a side note, but I've always thought it interesting that he almost always talks about this in the framing of a breakdown, because I think it can also be a breakdown in that it's a positive experience too. Like it's a breakdown of the flow, but that it's not just like, oh shit, my paint palette's dried up. It could also be a breakdown in the sense of, whoa, those leaves are like so beautiful. Right? And that's like a breakdown of the normal flow of our kind of going with.
The analysis of everydayness is very much based in like work, like the cobbler making shoes, or like a carpenter or whatever making a birdhouse. So it's kind of limited in that way, because obviously I'm not like painting all the time, and there are like certain qualities of the equipment in question. Like for example, if I wasn't aware of the utility of or like the benefits of using one certain sort of paintbrush over another, you know, for a particular part of the painting, then like knowing that and being aware of those qualities of the objects themselves is useful. Right. But even then, it's not the objectness that's really the most basic thing. It's like the in order to of the paintbrush. Yeah. It's not like, you can't just stop at being aware of the physical qualities. It's like the physical qualities make it an apt piece of equipment for like writing or something.
Yeah. Well, and I think within that, like, at least what's really obvious to me is like with it being, for Heidegger, like the breakdown of the everyday is almost what allows us to notice the systems of his metaphysic to arise. Is it calls so much attention to how we live life so differently now too. And the idea of a breakdown in the everyday, it's like, well, that really bears the necessity to define the everyday. And I think that's just an interesting project in terms of application, I guess. But
Yeah. I mean, I think one idea in Being in Time that's very applicable to like the everyday today, where it's like this very technological everydayness, is the idea of, I guess it would be like deseverance or de-distancing or bringing close, where basically, on his view, our experience of space is primarily one of bringing things close, so bringing things within the sphere of our involvement. And sometimes that involves a shortening of physical distance, you know? Like some things are more accessible than others because they're just close by. But first and foremost, it's bringing them within the range of our concern. And technology is actually a really good example of this because with, you know, the internet, for example, I can bring a whole world of information. Like, I can understand what's happening across the globe. I don't even have to leave my couch, you know? I can just... And so that's a sort of phenomenal bringing close.
Right. Well, and I think so much more is de-severed now in that way. And I was actually, in the Making Meaning episode that's coming out tomorrow at the time that we're recording this, I was talking to my parents about the difficulty with like justice work as a thing, because it's almost like the older you get, but also the more information you get, the more and more pressing these things seem. But it's so utterly overwhelming to be like, I need to be an anti-racist, an ally to the LGBTQIA plus community, a feminist, and like understand indigenous populations, people of color. And I also want to be like class conscious and economic justice and unions. And like, we can go on and on and on and on. And all of these things have been, even though I wouldn't say we're aware of them like 24/7, the way we are of this other kind of flow, we're certainly de-severed from them more than we were pre-internet and like the information age, which is just, I think, absolutely applicable, like you were saying. And I do really like the example you use in your paper of like a glass of water versus a pen. It's like, if you need to write a paper, even if the glass and water and pen are the same distance from you, the pen is phenomenologically closer, whereas if you're thirsty, the water is phenomenologically closer.
Even if the distance hasn't changed.
Right.
Yeah. And what you were saying about kind of this pressure to become more aware and more kind of involved in, I guess, social justice causes and stuff like that, and to stand up for things that are happening like way like far away from you because of technology. It's definitely a double-edged sword, you know, because that's good. I mean, to have people's awareness growing about a thing can definitely lead to it. You know, that growing attention can lead to actual positive change. But it reminded me, I think it's Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media. I think that's the title of it. But he talks about this in the beginning of the work. And it's one of those books that was written like decades ago, but you read it and you're like, this sounds like it could have been written yesterday. In terms of like his analysis of how technology is kind of shaping the human condition in a really interesting way. And I'll have to find the page number. I want to say it's in the 70s. I want to say 73, but that's just, I haven't read this book in years. So
that would be really impressive.
That's just a shot in the dark, but if that ends up being the page number,
witchcraft is real.
You'll be hearing about it next week. Yeah.
I think too, with that, like, I want to emphasize what you said about the importance of these things and how it is positive in the sense that like it can lead to real positive change. However, it also makes me think in terms of like practicality, which is kind of the struggle of phenomenology. Is I almost think of it as like bringing metaphysics back to physics, right? Is kind of the path of phenomenology in a weird way. It's like the go-between in that like the overwhelm of so many different causes that you believe in, or maybe you don't believe in them all equally, but I believe we should, and we should be aware and educated. But at the same time, what is actually productive to that growth? Probably something that looks like picking one or two causes and being really dedicated and diligent about specific movement and growth there, almost like an active choice to de-sever more strongly with like anti-racism than any other identity justice work, so that you can move forward in a more productive way, as opposed to like 2% change with like 30 causes. You can make like 60% change with one, in severing a bit from the others, de-severing more strongly from one, but that requires a lot of attention and intention.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there are some existentialists who would say that if you just say like, I believe in this cause, but you don't do it, and I think not even existentialists, there's a very like practical kind of idea that I think is like pretty common sense, that if you just say like, I believe that this is bad or this is good, or like, I believe that we should do more to help this cause, but you don't do anything, you're literally all talk, then you don't actually truly believe in it.
Right.
Know?
It's like how
it's in the acting, it's in the doing that one's values and one's identity kind of become congealed.
Right, is made.
So you gotta walk the talk, basically.
Yeah, totally.
Which seems pretty like, yeah.
It's something we know, but it's like being able to, I think it's a helpful both analogy, but also like application of what we're talking about.
Right. And a lot of social media too, I feel like it's a lot of the talking, and maybe some of them are doing the walking, but you don't really see it because it's mostly just talking and you know, bringing awareness to it.
Yeah, which is important to some extent. But one thing I saw that I thought was so powerful was, if you're going to post about something, try and make the awareness that you're bringing to something rooted in something that you actually did. So if you're really passionate about like animal rights, maybe instead of just posting, like reposting a post from an animal rights page, which I do that all the time. So this isn't saying that that's bad by any means.
Right.
But in terms of wanting to maybe ground it into these ideas that we're talking about, like go volunteer at an animal shelter and then post a picture of you having volunteered, link to this animal rights group, and talk a little bit about why it's important. And so you're still doing the awareness education piece, but you're grounding it into the lived reality.
Yeah, I think,
No, you're fine.
I think part of the complication with that is like, obviously that's the best path to do, but I think it's kind of, people want to feel like they are doing something to make a difference, because if you have this growing awareness and you're just confronted every day with all these terrible things that are happening and all these inequalities that are just pervasive, you know?
Yeah.
Technology allows us to have a growing awareness of that.
Right.
But then it's like, there are some things where it's like, I don't know what to do about that, you know?
Yeah.
So sometimes maybe it's a little bit of like a little cognitive dissonance, a little bit of like a feeling of hopelessness, you know?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just like, I guess I need to tell other people about this, because I don't know what to do, but you know, with like a shelter, like animal rights, I'm like, there's a shelter nearby, I'll go volunteer. But with more like global stuff where it's just like, I don't like this. This is bad, but I don't know how to fix it. I don't know. Sometimes just increasing the growing awareness, I guess, is a start, but
still it's congealing something still. It is complicated, and I think that's a good point. And I think also, like, I'll call awareness to the fact that having the capacity, time, and capability and space to be able to physically do something in time, like, comes with privilege to begin with. Like, not everyone has the time to, like,
go
not
do everyone
that.
has the time to volunteer,
right? So
yeah,
it's complicated.
It is.
So I think what you said about like also holding the tension of that cognitive dissonance is important too.